the very, very sad and shocking news of Matthew Perry, most famous for playing Chandler in Friends, who died last week, age 54. Really sad. And it was actually recently, well, maybe a year ago on this show, where I actually was talking about Matthew Perry because I read his book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. That's the name of the book. And the big terrible thing is his addiction issues. And I was beyond shocked to see this news. I saw it in my timeline and at first I didn't believe it. But then I realized that it was true. And you know, I'm not going to go into like speculation around his death itself, but like I did speak very highly of him. I can't remember what episode it was, but if you search in the podcast Matthew Perry, I'm sure it will be labeled somewhere and will come up. But I played some excerpts from his audiobook, which I found really interesting about his takes on addiction and everything like that. I was really sad. It came so out of left field. And I think I don't know how I felt about this. I think what I want to talk about is, you know, I heard some people in the radio on AM Talkback today actually being like, well, what's the big deal about Chandler from Friends? You know, I was like, why is he making the news? He hasn't done much since Friends, and that show was, you know, 20 years ago. Why is he on the front page? Anyway, I think it is so, like, it is hard to define how culturally relevant and game-changing Friends was at the time of airing, but still today, I think, and a lot of people kind of put it down to, you were either a Friends person or a Seinfeld person, which I'm definitely both. I think both shows are so great for so many reasons. And to me, they certainly both were kind of like the biggest shows of their era, being sort of like late 90s. I mean, Friends kind of went into like 2004, I think. Seinfeld ended in 99 and started in 90. But they would certainly, when I think of growing up, the two kind of live action sitcoms I saw the most of on TV would have been Seinfeld and Friends. But it's obvious why Friends' legacy is just so strong. So is Seinfeld's, but in very different ways. And I'm not going to get into the whole Seinfeld Friends debate. This is more about Friends, right? Friends as a show is so iconic and is still to this day such a comfort show for so many people, including me. Like, often Friends is just played in Australia on free-to-air TV, like just reruns of Friends. And you're just like, oh, great, Friends is on. I'll just put some episodes on while I clean the house or while I do other stuff. I'll just have it on as a background thing because it's so comfortable and familiar, and it's such a cozy show in like the weirdest way. And you think of every single one of those 6 main actors on that show, and they're all so iconic.
I have a flaw. Big deal. Like Joey's constant knuckle cracking isn't annoying, and Ross with his overpronouncing every single word, and Monica with that snort when she laughs. I mean, what the hell is that thing?
And then they all had varying degrees of success outside of Friends. Like, of course, Jennifer Aniston probably is the most like commercially successful in terms of doing other acting projects after Friends, but they're all still very like relevant people. Matthew Perry, as I said, after I read his book, I realized he did a reboot of The Odd Couple. He was in 17 again with Zac Efron, but I think it's not even about what they've done since Friends. It's just that show was such an iconic part of so many people's lives, and people have watched and rewatched and just obsessed over that show. And Friends, I'm sure it had been done before. I mean, I'm certain it's been done before, but the way Friends incorporated almost like, and I'll loosely use this term, but like soap opera-esque elements, like the fact that there was like continuity and things that like cliffhangers and things that were kind of left hanging over episodes, and love and breakups and all of that kind of stuff. I guess as opposed to Seinfeld, which was running concurrently, which was so much less about that. It was so much more, yes, there were things that carried through episodes, of course, but like it was so much more just about the episode, whereas Friends almost like had a narrative element that progressed as the show went on. And like How I Met Your Mother, which came later, which a lot of people labeled as a Friends clone, which it is. it was very similar in that. Like, there was a story to tell here. And I think people just fell in love with how... I think Friends is just a really real and authentic show. Like, you look at that show and you're like, 6 people, new adults, getting into their careers, working jobs, struggling with relationships, dating, work, the purpose of their life, all of the above, but just getting by through the support of their friends, you know, going to coffee shops, drinking coffee, talking about all their problems, and, you know, living with housemates in your 20s, all of that stuff that kind of like everyone sort of experiences.
I got off the plane.
Chandler in particular was such an icon of that show. Again, it's hard to even say there was one icon of that show. The ensemble cast, it was an ensemble cast, and they were so iconic. But I always personally connected a lot with Matthew Perry. Like, I think a lot of, like, he was just a funny character, like such a sassy, sarcastic kind of guy. And I think Matthew Perry really, really nailed that role.
You had sex today? Wow, it sounds even cooler when somebody else says it.
Funnily enough, he talks in that show about how when he read the script for Friends for the first time, which I think at the time was called Friends Like You or something like that, before he was cast in Friends, Matthew Perry, he did a few things, but before he was cast in Friends, Matthew Perry was a lead and he was contracted to this pilot called LAX 2194, which was a show about baggage handlers at LAX, the airport, in 2194, and it was like aliens coming in and out and stuff like that. And he says in his book it was a really stupid show and he didn't want to do it. And because he was contracted to it, he wasn't allowed to audition for Friends, but he read the script for Friends and saw the character Chandler and immediately thought, this is me, I have to get this role, and I can't let someone else do this role. I have to do it. I'll do anything to do it. And ended up being able to audition and you know, became what he became. I think it's really funny because he was like stuck on this weird sci-fi sitcom that no one's ever heard of or seen. I don't know if it even got picked up for a season. I think he was just contracted to be in the pilot. And then he ditched that and went to do Friends, which probably would have been the best decision of his life. Another thing about him that I didn't know is Matthew Perry was really good friends with Hank Azaria, who is one of the key voice actors in The Simpsons, who voices like Chief Wiggum, Lenny, Moe, all of those kind of like nasally voice characters. That's Hank Azaria. And never would have thought that, but yeah, Matthew Perry and Hank Azaria were friends from high school and were really good friends for most of their lives. And Hank Azaria did do a very like, you know, heartfelt message to respect his friend who passed away. But yeah, I mean, his legacy is certainly in Friends, and the heart of that show and the beauty of that show was just in those relationships and those characters that were all so beloved. And, you know, I even think in age, like, I'm starting to relate more to Friends than Seinfeld. And while I always will love Seinfeld, and I always have loved it, and I've always found it hilarious, I just think Friends has so much more of this heart and this understanding of the realness that it is to be a human being, which is the antithesis of what Seinfeld was even trying to be. But, you know, the more I experience and the older I get, which is a lame thing to say, but like, I do feel like I relate more to Friends because I see myself in a lot of the characters and the struggles they're going through and the relationships they're in and the jobs they're in and all of that. Like, oh yeah, I've been there, I've done this, like, I get this, I feel this, and this is real. And it is really, really sad news. Like, especially knowing Matthew Perry's struggles with addictions, I was so devastated to see this, because I think at the end of the book, he talked about how he'd been sober and had been really well. And yeah, again, I'm not going to speculate on his death, but it was said that, you know, there weren't drugs found around the scene. But yeah, it's a really sad story. And you know, if Friends meant something to you, write into the show this week. Let me know what Friends meant to you, what Matthew Perry meant to you as an actor, as Chandler. just such an iconic character from such an iconic TV show. Will be missed. But yeah, it's a shame.